Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful and inspiring day, and thank you so much for joining me today for another art video. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my painting process for a set of watercolor grayscale eye studies, and I'm going to be explaining why grayscale studies are so incredibly powerful. I wanted to create a video to share here at my channel on this because honestly, this kind of study helped me make a ton of forward progress with my watercolor painting. And I didn't only work on this kind of study in the beginning when I was just getting started with my watercolor painting. I really love working on these kinds of studies to the day whenever I feel I have lost practice with a specific kind of subject, but also whenever I just want to sit down and practice my observational skills, keeping my observational skills sharp, or upgrading the level of realism in any particular kind of subject that I feel I need to improve in. Alright, so I decided to break this video apart into 3 separate sections, and I'm going to be leaving timestamps for you in the description box below in case you'd like to jump to any specific section. In the first part of this video, I'm going to be talking about why isolated studies are so powerful in helping us increase our art skills. In the second part of this video, I'm going to be talking specifically about grayscale studies. And finally, in the third part of this video, I'm going to be sharing in general terms the process that I went through in order to create these watercolor eye studies. All right, so let's get on with the show. By this point, the majority of the amazing people over at my Patreon membership site, as well as probably most people over at my free Facebook group, are well aware that I am a huge proponent for isolated studies. And what I mean with isolated studies is basically breaking apart more complex compositions, or even something like a portrait. In this case, we're studying, eyes, which are a facial feature, but breaking down complex compositions apart into techniques, into elements, into layers, even into separate art fundamentals that you can study in isolation individually and really focus and delve deeper into before, or at the very least alongside, a piece that we're going to be working on, which is going to take us a very long time to create or is more complex. Now, I'm not really talking about pieces that we create faster or drawings or paintings that we do in our sketchbooks. Personally, I would consider those to be studies. Maybe they don't particularly lead to any larger project or larger piece, but you're practicing with those smaller and perhaps even imperfect pieces as well. I'm talking more so when we are intending to work on a series of paintings or even a larger painting that is going to take us days or even months to complete. That's the kind of larger piece that I am talking about. So when we do a little bit of planning and preparation beforehand and even work on these kinds of isolated studies that I am talking about and make time to break down those complex compositions into parts that we can study or practice individually, we are not only so much more likely to arrive at an outcome that we'll love and we'll be proud of, but also we're going to be enjoying the process so much more because we're going to have that confidence along the way. The process is going to go a lot more smoothly because we're going to have all of these tools in our tool belt, as opposed to just sitting down in front of a blank canvas or sheet of paper thinking that everything is going to go smoothly when we haven't even taken time to practice all of these individual things, which are going to be required to complete that piece. And there are so many kinds of isolated studies that we can do and things that we can research to better inform our work, depending on the subject that we're trying to draw or paint, as well as the style that we're going for. And grayscale studies of individual facial features are just one of those kinds of studies that I started doing in particular when I was trying to improve my portraits. Little did I know that this practice of dissecting complex compositions apart and really focusing in on one thing or a couple of things at a time, really those skills and that knowledge that I gained from doing this permeated and affected positively everything else that I did. I don't know about you guys, but when I was first getting started on my own journey with art and was getting serious about progressing my drawing and my painting skills, I had this belief that I would be able to sit down at my easel or get to work on the piece that is intended to be finalized and even shared with the world. And I thought that I would be able to get everything right since the beginning without even having control over my medium, without even knowing about color mixing, without knowing about, I don't know, how to create a sensation of depth in a landscape or even a still life. All of these individual things that go into creating a finalized, more complex piece. In the case of portraits, knowledge of things like facial proportions and the structure of the human head is so important. And doing these kinds of isolated studies of facial features is incredibly helpful because each individual facial feature is a complex structure in and of itself that has many anatomical elements that you have to know about if you're looking for higher levels of realism. And really what I am getting at here is that every single type of artwork, whether it's an animal drawing or painting, whether it's a still life drawing or painting, a landscape, a portrait, a completely abstract piece, whatever it is, everything can be broken down into separate things that we can study and practice in isolation. And this is going to allow us to improve our skills, our mastery over our medium, and our confidence in a much less overwhelming way. When I was first getting started and I was sitting down in front of my stretched canvases without having done absolutely any practice, any studying or anything of the sort, and I thought everything would turn out just great, they honestly never did. I was always underwhelmed. The visions that I had for my pieces never came to fruition, and I was always disappointed because I didn't have the tools and the knowledge that I needed. And it wasn't until I did this kind of study along with other isolated studies, as well as embraced the sketchbook habit and embraced imperfection and exploration, as opposed to only providing all of my effort and value into that finalized piece that is meant to be perfect. And the simple fact of acknowledging that larger complex pieces, really, there's a lot that goes into them, that we can break them apart, that I was able to make more significant and faster progress in my artistic journey. Okay, so specifically when it comes to grayscale studies, whether you're doing grayscale studies of eyes, you can even do grayscale studies of landscapes, anything really, still lives or even complete portraits, grayscale studies are incredibly helpful because when it comes to developing a sense of realism, of three-dimensional form, and of depth in our pieces, value is number one, even above color correctness. And if you have no idea what I am talking about when I say value, value in art refers to the lightness to darkness of each and every single color. So the scale from light to dark of a color. And the thing is that in the beginning, when we're first getting started with practicing higher levels of realism, it's important that we develop that skill for pinpointing areas of highlights, wide range of midtones, and darkest darks in whatever kind of reference it is we're using, whether it is a photo reference or whether it is something that we have in front of us that we're drawing or painting from direct observation. Because if we're not able to pinpoint those highlights, those midtones, and those darks, then we're not going to be able to translate that information to make that happen in our drawing or painting, and we're not going to be able to make the piece look realistic. And the thing here is that when we're working from a full color photograph and we're working on a full color painting or even a drawing, what happens is that every single color in that photo or in that painting that we're creating has a wide range of values from the lightest version of that color to the darkest version of that color. So imagine that in a full colored photograph, in a full colored painting, you have a ton of different value scales for a ton of different colors. And you have to compare and relate those different values of those different colors to each other in order to see if this section right here with this yellow is lighter or darker than this section over here with, let's say, a red or an orange. And when we're working from a photograph that has been completely desaturated or turned into black and white, it's a lot easier because all of those different value scales from all of those different colors have been merged together into only one scale of one color. And so it is an amazing way for beginners to practice pinpointing different values in their references and make them happen with a lot less overwhelm, because we're not having to deal with comparing different values of different colors to each other because they're all in the same scale. When I am first getting started with a brand new student who wants to learn how to paint and has no prior experience with painting, I first have them start with monochromatic pieces or grayscale pieces using only one color, because this allows them to get familiar with whatever painting medium it is that we're learning. It allows them to gain control of their medium, to practice brush strokes, to practice doing gradients, to practice different textures. So many things can be learned before even moving on to color theory and color mixing. And when it comes to painting with watercolor, you guys are probably well aware by this point that water control is a huge thing to get used to when we're just getting started. So working on grayscale studies or monochromatic pieces even is a great way for people just getting started, because this way you gain a certain level of mastery over your medium. You at least get to know it a bit before bringing in the huge complex monster of a topic that is color. Even with these eye studies, I'm not only studying their three-dimensional structure, but I'm also practicing texture, because we have hair texture in those eyebrows, and we also get to practice those eyelashes, which in my opinion are very, very challenging. Okay, so I hope that I made a case for grayscale studies, whatever kind of subject it is that you are passionate about, that you want to improve your skills in when it comes to either drawing or painting. You can gain so much doing grayscale studies. All right, so having said all that, I'm going to quickly walk you through the general process that I am following as I am creating these eye paintings. But before doing that, I just want to take a quick second to welcome all of you new people who are just visiting my channel today for the very first time. Welcome. I am so happy that you found my channel, and do consider subscribing because I share new helpful videos for artists every single week. All right, so the very first thing that you saw me do in the beginning of this video was create my 3 preliminary outline sketches completely freehand for these 3 eyes. I really took my time with those outline sketches because I know that they are the base for everything else. And if that outline sketch does not look good, if it's not effective, especially in this case because we're drawing a part of the human anatomy, we're drawing eyes, we have to make sure that those proportions and those shapes are effectively created before moving forward with the painting process, because otherwise everything is going to fall apart and the painting process is going to be a total waste of time because that base is not effective. At least this is the case if you're looking for higher levels of realism. If you're not looking for your eyes to look that realistic, then effective proportions and shapes and everything like that is not really that necessary. And just as a quick note here, usually when I think I'm going to be doing a lot of erasing on my sheet of watercolor paper, I would rather create my preliminary outline sketches freehand on a separate sheet of drawing paper or a sketchbook, and then transfer my outline sketch onto my sheet of watercolor paper using something like tracing paper or whatever kind of transferring method, so that I don't run the risk of damaging or dirtying up my watercolor paper. The least amount of erasing that you do on your watercolor paper, the better, of course. In this case, because these are just smaller studies, I didn't really bother with the transferring process or anything like that, and I just made sure to draw very lightly on my watercolor paper so that I could gently erase my mistakes. Before getting started with these studies, I did collect 3 different reference images of eyes, slightly at different angles so that I could challenge myself. I had them open in Photoshop. I had them desaturated already, so I was looking at a black and white photo. And as I was creating Both the preliminary outline sketches as well as throughout the entire painting process, I am constantly observing my references. Even if my end goal is not to get these eyes to look exactly like the eyes from the people in the photos, I do use references to help inform my decisions as to where I develop my different values, get ideas of where there are soft transitions between different values as well as harder edges, making sure that the shapes look effective to me, and just to remind myself of little tiny subtleties and nuances that I maybe would have otherwise forgotten if I didn't have a reference photo. But anyway, once those preliminary outline sketches had been effectively created, I then went ahead and chose the ready-made black that I would be using for these studies. And I just went with neutral tint from my Van Gogh watercolor botanical set. And that is that little half pan that you see to the left there. And then after having prepped the bristles of my paintbrush by swiveling my paintbrush in my container of water a bit, I started bringing out this pigment onto different wells on my color mixing palette. Some of my color mixers had more water in them, which made the color more transparent, and others had a greater amount of color or pigment in them, which made them darker and more saturated. As you're probably well aware, with watercolor, the easiest way to lighten or darken a color is by either adding more water to the color or adding more color or pigment into your color mixer. And we're able to create a wide range of values using only one color. If you've never practiced creating value scales, little squares or rectangles going from lighter values to darker values or vice versa with this medium, this is an exercise that I would highly recommend doing. It's gonna help with your water control as well. A while back, I shared a video here on my YouTube channel in which I go much more into depth when it comes to water control, and I provide exercises that are super helpful for beginners. I'm gonna make sure to leave a link to that one down below in the description box in case you'd like to go and check it out. For these 3 watercolor studies, I basically did what I do with all of my watercolor paintings. I work from lighter and more translucent colors and make my way towards darker and more saturated colors. Only in this case, I am just using one color, which is black. When I am creating a more finalized painting, a complete painting, I usually create color mixtures. I bring in a second color to darken my colors, etc. But as I was mentioning before, I think when we're just getting started with watercolor, it's an essential kind of foundation to work from, or a skill to have, to be able to create a whole range of values using only one color. But I always work from lighter and more translucent colors or color mixtures and make my way towards darker darks incrementally and patiently. I am making sure to allow layers of paint to dry in between unless I am looking for a blurred out, softened edge around my shapes. Then I allow myself to go in wet on wet. But for the most part, if you're looking for sharp, defined edges, it's essential to allow your layers of paint to dry before going back in and attempting to darken areas even further or add more detail. And even more so when you are painting in a very small area where you need a lot of control, like let's say the tear duct or the iris, it's important to keep that highlight protected within the eyeball. So it's important to have that control. And allowing your layers to dry in between is going to provide you that control. Whenever you get a sharp defined edge around your shapes that you start laying down because your paper is dry, you can always go back in and soften those edges with a clean and slightly dampened paintbrush. Just run those paintbrush bristles along those edges and you're going to soften that out. Throughout this entire process, it's just very important that you consider what effect you're going for. Do you want those edges and those transitions to be soft and gradiating into each other? Or do you want sharp and defined edges? And depending on what it is that you're going for, you need to make sure that you're placing more paint on paper that is wet, or you have to make sure that you're allowing your paper to dry completely before going back in. You have to keep your mind in the game. Now, with these studies, whenever I am painting eyes, whether full colored or only in one color, I always leave the eyelashes until the very, very end, because those eyelashes have to be somewhat well defined, especially if we're painting eye close-ups like these. And if we go in on paper that is wet or even partially damp, that paint is gonna feather out, it's gonna blur out, and we're gonna make a mess. Make sure that you're taking it a step at a time, that you're having patience, and that you're allowing your layers of paint to dry in between, depending on the effect that you are going for. It's also important, I feel, especially when painting eyelashes, to make sure that you're using an adequate paintbrush. You're gonna notice that I bring out my fine detailing brush whenever it comes time to painting in those eyelashes. And not only this, but because I know that eyelashes are challenging for me, I always take time to practice those brush strokes, those slightly curved, tapered brush strokes before actually painting them in. And the very final little note that I wanted to add here in regards to my watercolor painting process is that I really do my best to stay away from any sort of outline looking thing or stark looking line, because outlines are going to retract from the level of realism that you're trying to achieve. So what I like doing is I like seeing little individual sections of different values as little abstract shapes that I am creating with my brush strokes, as opposed to seeing areas as being divided by outlines, because in realism there are no outlines. All right, you guys, so I am going to leave you to hopefully enjoy and get some value out of the rest of these painting time lapses. Just for you to be aware, I am using a size 14 round brush, a size 6 round brush, and a fine detailing brush for those eyelashes. As always, all of the supplies that I use to create these pieces are going to be left down below for you in the description box of this video. And of course, if you're interested in getting immediate access to downloadable outline sketches for these eyes so that you can just transfer them onto your sheet of watercolor paper and get on with the painting process, and you want immediate access to my exclusive step-by-step, fully narrated, real-time drawing and painting tutorials that I don't share anywhere else, make sure to check out my Patreon site. Over there, every single tutorial has downloadable goodies, my outline sketches, my high-resolution reference photos, my supply list, including the specific list of colors, and much, much more. Art fundamentals classes, weekly sketchbook prompts, and all that good stuff can be found over there. A quick shout out to all of my Patreon community members. I love you guys so, so much, and I am so thankful, so appreciative that you are part of that innermost community of mine. It's because of you guys that I'm able to continue sharing these videos for free here on YouTube. So if you want access to all of that good stuff and resources that I'm constantly creating behind the scenes for my community over on Patreon for a very, very small amount a month, a link to my Patreon site will be down below in the description box for you in case you'd like to go and check it out. Alright everyone, that is going to do it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, that you learned something new, or that you found it inspiring. If you did like it, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up because it really helps support the work that I am doing here on YouTube and allows more artists to get to know about my channel. Thank you so very much for watching today. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments for me, make sure to leave them down below in the comment section. I always love hearing from you guys and read every single one of your comments. Don't forget to subscribe so that I can see you next week for another video, and stay inspired. Bye guys!